Hi, everyone, and welcome to Stoked, the ultimate Star Trek online podcast. This is episode 123, and I want to say good morning to all of the fine folks in the JBLive.tv chat room who have joined me this Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Pacific over JBLive.tv to rock out this week's episode. We got a big one. It's a big show this week. Lots of things we're going to be covering. Good morning, everybody in the chat room. It's good to see you. Look at them go. It's always so much fun. Okay, so in this week's episode, we're going to introduce our new Talk Trek segment. And I'll tell you, when I was first thinking about this segment, I was going to call it Back to Trek. And I kind of decided Talk to Trek has more of a catch, and the rest of the Jupiter Force fleet kind of ran with the Talk to Trek name, and it seems to have stuck. But the original idea was I wanted to take snapshots from STO and look at them and pull them out and look at the Star Trek elements that might match up with moments in Star Trek canon. And then take snapshots of those moments of Star Trek canon and analyze them and see where the two might differ, or see where the two might compare, or see where one might have been inspired from the other. Obviously, STO inspired from canon. Because one of the things that we all do as part of the Star Trek Online community is when we talk about things in the game, we often use the phrase, it's not Star Trek enough. Or, man, it felt so Trek. Or they really nailed the Trek. Or that was a great Trek moment. You know, like I think of standing there on the sand with Obasek yelling at me, and right at the last moment, the camera pans around and the crew beams up because my ship saved me. Obviously, an awesome Star Trek moment. There's things like that throughout the game, but we never really truly define what that is. What does it's not Trek enough mean? What is it's very Trek? What does that mean? We never really say. So I thought, would there be some kind of way to come to some sort of hive mind group consensus of what is Trek? I don't actually know if that's possible. That might be too ambitious. But I'm going to attempt to try to get to that point as best we can. And that's what we're going to do with the Talk Trek segments. We're going to look at things and say, this is very Star Trek. See what they did here with this scene? Man, that's Star Trek. And then look for those moments in the game and vice versa. But it's a lot to wrap our brains around. And even if we can come to some sort of collective agreement where, we can say, yeah, that is very Star Trek. And we'll do that through watching episodes of Star Trek or movies of Star Trek in these moments and talking about them with you. And of course, I'm going to encourage a lot of you to watch live and tell us in our live chat room what you think about these Star Trek moments. So we'll pre-announce a week ahead, which episodes or which movies of Star Trek we're going to want to watch to sort of get these moments from. So that way you can watch as well and leave comments or join the chat room and share your thoughts live. And then we'll kind of come to, hopefully, some sort of group consensus of what is Trek. Now, this week's episode, we're taking inspiration from the Romulan reruns. We'll often look at something in the game and grab our inspiration from there, but not always. And this week, we looked at some of the best moments of Romulans in TNG and TOS, because it seemed to fit. And then next week, it's the 2800, or the 2200. I'm drawing a blank on the name right now. But it's a very Dominion-heavy episode. You guys remember, it's the latest featured episode. Well, so we're going to look at some Deep Space Nine episodes, and we'll tell you which ones in our Talk Trek segment. And it's going to be a moment to sort of use this time where the reruns are featured, because honestly, we've already reviewed the reruns here on Stoked. The 2800. We can't really review them again. But I think it'd be fun to take a Star Trek angle at it, because we're all Star Trek fans, and it's a segment that the fleet has been looking forward to a lot, because we love to sit around on TeamSpeak and just talk about these classic Star Trek moments, and now we're going to talk about them with you. So we'll introduce that segment at the latter half of the show. But if you also want to get your hands on some new STO mission content, well, the Foundry is delivering these days. Not only is Cryptic doing a Foundry Spotlight this week, but we've also got a completely new Foundry Files. I call it the comic book version of Foundry missions. We'll tell you all about that in the Foundry Files. But before we go on, I want to talk a little bit about some news. There's not a lot that's been announced this week. Nothing really major, because I think Cryptic is mostly heads down on Season 6. However, if you recall from our interview back with Gozer, we learned that he's now the king of PvP. Gozer's going to be taking on PvP. And this Friday, he made a nice long post in the Star Trek Online forum, which he says is going to be the start of the State of PvP post that he's going to try to do of various different lengths and have various different content in them depending on what's happened that week. But his first initial post was sort of setting the stage, and it seemed very honest and very raw. And so I wanted to read a few highlights from that, because while you might not be a huge PvP fan, this is more applicable to you than ever. So if you right now are not a current PvPer, you don't really find it very interesting, then you might actually be the target audience for this. Existing PvP members might find some of these changes a little hard to swallow. That'll probably be an ongoing discussion that we have. But so jumping right in, put simply, the state of PvP in STO is fail, says Gozer. And I don't know why my screen's flashing like that, you guys. I apologize for that screen flicker. I will relaunch my desktop capture thing. Anyways, so he very brutally just puts it right out there. The state of PvP in STO is fail, equal fail. That's pretty, that's pretty brutally honest for a developer to come right out and say. He says, I don't think I can be any clearer on this point. You players don't like it, and we the developers don't like it, and the data we pull from the servers backs that statement up as well. Which is pretty interesting. Right now, PvP is in such bad shape that we, the developers, have to decide if we think we can turn this problem around. Participation in PvP-related activities is so low on an hourly, daily, and weekly and monthly basis that it could, in fact, just be completely taken out of STO, and it would not have an impact on the overall number of people that log into the game and play in any significant way. So the state of PvP is bad. All things that I think a lot of us had maybe inferred and sort of guessed, but this is, coming right from Gozer. So we know that they're looking at this as like, this is a critical situation and they've really got to fix it. And they're willing to make some dramatic changes because the impacts are not as significant. Right at this moment, I'm the only resource PvP gets. My job is to figure out if I can find a way to improve the entire system in a way that does not impact development of the rest of the game in any significant way. I'm going to do my best to make PvP a viable STO gameplay feature that appeals to a much larger audience than it does now. Okay, that seems very reasonable. He says, also, this means that many of you are not going to like the changes that I'm forced to make in order to meet these goals. But before you get too upset at some change, you might want to consider the alternative, which would be no PvP at all. So, sort of setting the stage there, right? We're going to introduce some massive sweeping changes to PvP. This has to be done in order to save it. And the alternative would be we take PvP out because it's just not in a state that we're proud of. Which is also very telling in itself. He says, he goes on to give an example, and I thought this example was very telling. The example reads here: I see lots of threads about KDF players having access to gear that Fed players do not. This isn't going to be a problem in the new system since there will not be any Fed versus KDF PvP. All PvP in the new system will be cross-faction queues. That is a pretty big change, isn't it? So, not a lot here that I want to chat about directly with the details of this stuff, but what I do want to focus on is how great I think it is that Gozer is now the owner of PvP. In some threads later on, he explains that even if it means that he is divided amongst his many responsibilities with PvP, just the fact that PvP will now have a representative in Cryptic Studios that can go to producers and ask for resources, can go to stall and get things put on the schedule, can go to systems and get certain systems made, can go to QA and get there's just certain things that before needed a cheerleader to push through that it didn't have. PvP didn't have an owner, and now it does. On top of that, Gozer has been with the STO development community since the beginning. He's one of their MVPs. So to have an MVP taking up something as critical as PvP means that he should have the leeway and the clout he needs to lean on certain teams to get the things done. This is a great thing, I think, for PvP. Even if the end development isn't something that everybody loves, I think the opportunity is there to work with Gozer to move it in a direction that the STO community really likes. And I think Gozer is taking a very honest and open approach with the community, saying, maybe we've had disagreements with the STFs in the past. Maybe you haven't liked this or that. Maybe you don't like the transporter that I made, which is an old story. All of these things, he's sort of just putting it all out there saying, that's okay, you know what, we're starting on ground zero with this. And also, he indicates in previous threads that, he's keeping an eye on how the community responds, how people work with him, the quality of dialogue people engage with him, and then those people may find themselves selected for some PvP testing in the future. There's a lot at play here when a new development into an MMO starts and the community is being involved at the ground level like this. There's a real opportunity to have the community have an impact on that development as long as the dialogue is civil and respectful. And when that happens, you can really see some great results. And I think Gozer has taken a great first step here. I am more excited about what Gozer might do for PvP than I am for Season 6 in some regards. Because PvP seems like something, with Gozer talking about it now, it seems more tenable. It seems like something I can actually wrap my brain around. The Season 6 features all remain vague and nebulous. And a lot of us don't even think we'll even see the details in those Season 6 features until they hit Tribble, like a lot of previous updates. And a lot of times when the dev comes on, like Dan Stahl has done in the past and said, well, I don't know what you're complaining about. Season 6 is going to have fleet star-based progression. It's going to have 5-man missions. Well, honestly, those comes across as details that have just recently been firmed up that he's then talking about in the forum, like they've known about them all along. How could we have not have considered them? To me, Season 6 still feels very much in flex. Like certain details are still being ironed out. Now, that could be completely wrong, but that's just what we've been communicated so far. For these big season features, they like to pull a little bit of a Steve Jobs trick on us and keep it all behind the curtain and then go, ha-ha, if they can. It could be also that it's just under heavy development still. It just doesn't feel concrete, whereas the PvP stuff feels like it's longer term, like it's going to be stuff that we won't see the total fruits of for a while, but it feels like something I'm already able to watch the development path on. And it feels like something we're going to see soon. And that is making me, or it feels like something we're going to see the results of in some capacity soon, even if it's not the completed PvP overhaul. And that excites me. And it excites me that it has an owner now. And even though PvP has been significantly underrated in the surveys that we've seen, if you can believe those surveys, if it's done right, I could definitely pick it up. I find PvP fun in bursts. It's just it gets old after a while. If there's some variation, some change up, something at stake, I think I could find PvP an interesting long-term end game type of approach. So we'll see where PvP goes with that, and we'll stay on top of it and maybe even see if we can't twist Gozer's ear from time to time to get updates from him. All right, well, that's all I've got for the top of the show. Let's jump into the Foundry Files. Welcome to the Foundry Files. Uwe and Murphy are back. Hey, guys, welcome back to the show.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey.
And this week we're reviewing The Needs of the Few, which is created by Kirkvat just very recently. At the time of this recording, 324 plays, an average rating of 4 out of 5 stars. It's a purely diplomatic mission, so I want to make that right up front. This is a non-combat mission, although there are a few tense moments where you think some combat might break out. Highly recommended for players who are more into story and not so much for shooting stuff. I've said it before. I said it on the live stream today. These types of missions are like my Star Trek comic books. If I was going to read a Star Trek comic, which I do from time to time, I would instead sit down and play a Foundry mission like this because it's great dialogue, it's interactive, and things like that. But enough with that. Why don't we jump into the review? Murphy, do you want to start us off with the story?
All right, I shall start us off then. The mission
sir.
starts with your ship on the way to Alonia, or as Chris liked to call it, Elephantia, or of elephants. Yeah. Anyway, I had to call you out on that. So a world that's currently applying for the Federation. You're going here to make your own observations on the culture and see if they really should be accepted for membership or not. It's up to you to make that determination. And so you arrive here and you're thrown into loads and loads and loads of detail about this culture and how it works. It's economics, it's government, all of that. So basically, the first half of the mission is learning a lot about this society, which is mainly a scientific society. They're now all for science. Science is their high class here. And that's going to be a big part of the mission, is learning that science has really changed the way their culture has adapted for their planet. And so a lot of this detail, though, can be optional, but it isn't. You have to go read through it at least to progress the mission. And I think we would all like it to be optional because a lot of this is dialogue that you won't really need in the end. But it is nice detail. That's why I wish it would be optional, because a lot of this is great. If you want to know all about this planet and its society, great detail. It definitely fleshes out this new culture that you meet in the game.
Yeah, it feels like that's a great way to put it, Murphy's. It feels like a very rich culture of a species that would very well fit into the Star Trek universe and is sort of in this interesting phase in their society and how they come into this overall larger intergalactic society of other of worlds. It has a lot of political undertones in the story. I actually almost accidentally said countries because it's very much like other countries with some issues that we look at from our perspective as bad human rights issues, something that some people look at and would be very judgmental about. But then when you learn more about the situation, you kind of start to see it from their perspective and have a little bit better of an understanding. And I felt like this mission was pretty successful at that. What did you think of the overall story?
We thought it was really good. Like, the plot definitely has all that political feel and stuff to it, and it's really nice. We don't want to give too many spoilers out on that, but yeah, you're right. It does definitely hit a lot of that political stuff, which I think some of the greatest Foundry mission we've seen and some of the greatest Star Trek hit this on the head, these political and just social issues, and that's what makes great Star Trek overall.
Yeah. Lots of writing and things like that. Did you have any major issues writing-wise you bumped into?
Not really. Just a lot of dialogue back to back to back. It could be separated to make it a little more like not overwhelming to most of your player base. A few other things we'd like to bring up in story section is there weren't really any characters. There was only really the guy at the desk.
Yeah, the admiral guy that you talk to or whatever.
There's the admiral who's a minor one, and then the guy on the planet who's your contact or whatever, the diplomat. And really, that's about it. Not really any major characters, which you would want to see from a diplomatic mission because it's all story, and you'd like to see some memorable characters. So that's one thing that could be improved in the story here. Some great canons usage with the Federation Charter. It actually is quoted as you go through the mission.
Yeah.
There's some minor touchstoning in some of the dialogue with the Genesis device that one of the colonists brings up during the mission. And there's no spelling and grammar issues, so bonus there.
Yeah, especially considering all the amount of writing that's in this one. What was the overall rating you gave the story section?
Story received an 8.07. It's our 7th ranked Foundry mission in story.
There you go. All right, well, for a mission that was very dialogue heavy, why don't we talk about any technical achievements that you noticed that came through during the mission?
All right, so we had some great maps created by this user. First of all, he built the colony outside, the first colony you go to in this mission, which is just nice. You can definitely see its more advanced culture, and great. Me and we were just looking around at that for a while. And then one of the maps in the Foundry is a pre-made Cardassian colony.
Yeah.
And that one I've seen used a lot in the Foundry, just for your generic alien colony or your Cardassian colony. But Kirkfat managed to take this map and make it look almost brand new. I did not recognize it until I brought up the mini map. It's got like walls around it. It's pinned in. There's like smoking chimneys everywhere. It really looks different when you first look at it. And he's put a lot of detail into this as you walk around this section of the planet.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so and then there were no pointless map transitions in this mission, which were really nice. Each map progressed the story in a different way, so you didn't feel like when you were sitting at one of those loading screens, like, why did
I would argue maybe the very first map where you go in and talk to the Admiral guy for the first time, is it possible that could have been, I guess it's not possible Foundry-wise to have that dialogue in sector space, like over like a hailing frequency, and then I could have just beamed directly to the planet and skipped that first room? You
could have. But I think it made a little more sense to be there at his office for story-wise.
And it does at the end kind of bring it all back together.
Yeah. I think you could have done it in sector space, but it made a lot more sense to do it on the planet when you first meet him. Because that's what would have happened if you were visiting the planet. You'd first go talk to that guy. So
Right. What did you overall, or if there's any other points on the technical, feel free to mention them. But overall, what did you rate the technical section?
An 8.0. Fifth ranked in our Foundry missions.
Now, it's of course time to move on to the gameplay section. Uwe is currently restarting his video. He's timed it so that way his video hopefully will come back right as he's supposed to talk about the gameplay area, which now goes to him. Uwe, why don't you tell us about the gameplay?
First thing to note is, you mentioned earlier, Chris, this is a diplomatic mission only. This means no combat at all.
Right.
There's no space or ground combat, and as a result, the combat scores on the spreadsheet were taken out of the final scores because we do not want to punish the author of having a diplomatic-only mission. There is also no space gameplay because there were no space maps, and this was also taken out of the overall scoring system for the same reason as the combat. Don't want to punish the author. There was ground gameplay, naturally, but it was weak. There's a lot of running around. There's next to no dialogue actions from NPCs. There's no optional interactable objects. There's no puzzles, which could have improved a section of the mission. A shame for a development mission because it really could have vamped up the campus to compensate for the lack of combat. There was an alternate ending to compensate, though.
Yes.
This is dialogue driven due to finding limitations. There are references to the Prime Directive, which are present, and they dictate your decisions. So if a specific option is chosen, there are multiple sub-options to further choose what happens at the end. This gives the player a wide range of choices and makes them really feel like they're making the decisions since they are the captain. But to refer back to an earlier point, there was difficulty with the scoring sheet due to this no combat and no space gameplay. This makes the unique result for this mission in terms of gameplay due to eliminating 3 separate categories from the gameplay scoring sheet.
Right.
It's a great mission nonetheless, but it did put it in first place for gameplay with an overall result of 8.5.
Wow. Now, I don't know if I would agree with that as an overall rating. It seems more like a technicality.
Yeah, it was our first problem with the score sheet in the gameplay section because we had to take out 3 different categories. Without it, it made more sense if we kept those categories in. But we, again, didn't want to penalize him for the combat and stuff.
Right.
I think originally it was in like 7th place or something, and it felt right. But again, he didn't intend for it to have combat and that stuff. So,
right. Okay, well, that's fair. So overall, an 8.5, huh, gentlemen? Well, Murphy, why don't you sum it up and take us out?
Yeah, so overall, this is a great story. It is a great Star Trek story, and if you are a fan of great Star Trek stories, this mission has that. And so we highly recommend it for those people who love Star Trek stories like this. Mm-hmm. Great maps, great environments. It definitely adds to the feel of the mission. The only section I'd say that the author could improve is gameplay. And since you can't really add many gameplay options because you're trying to make this non-combat, I guess the only thing you could really add is maybe a little more optional dialogue for conversations and puzzles. Because the one thing that I think would have made this mission a lot better is some sort of puzzle, which there isn't any in this one at all.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. In fact, I was kind of expecting one, to be honest. In fact,
same.
One of the reasons I was like, so I got to pay close attention to the dialogue, right? Because there's probably like some sort of puzzle. It's going to make me remember everything.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't.
Never happened.
No, and that's kind of okay too, because
it's all right. I mean, it is driven by the dialogue, really. But again, I think my personal opinion is a good diplomatic mission would take a puzzle or something. But yeah, still a great mission overall with story and technical.
What was the total rating?
8.08, our 4th ranked Foundry mission currently.
There we go. Uwe, any final thoughts to close us out with?
Don't forget to play the 2800 replay series in a few days' time for the limited time reward. Especially go and play a Facility 4028 to see an NPC that looks like Mav. Oh, wait, it doesn't look like Mav because he shaved his stash.
Yeah, he shaved his stash. So right. Now, yeah.
Well, maybe we can start a campaign to get that stash back because that was a mighty stash.
Fun. Yeah. I was completely shocked to see that he had no stash and was blue last week. I mean, that was a shocker.
The blue thing. So see, the blue thing was the video, that particular video, the color filters on there. It took hours. It took 10 hours to render, and so it would have taken another 10 hours to render a replacement file. So I was like, what am I gonna do? Got to get it out.
That's totally not a cover-up that Mav's in Boolean, but anyway.
Right, it could have been just revealing his Andorian.
Just saying.
Or Boolean, I like that, yeah.
Probably Boolean. So yeah, send your Foundry missions to foundryfiles@jupiterforce.net. That's how we got this mission. It was submitted to us by Kirk Fett. So anytime you have missions, send it right there. Also, go check out the Foundry Spotlight missions. Cryptic just started that up again, and they're working with some people over at Starbase UGC right now to highlight some great missions made by the Foundry community, and this week's was Federation Desperation by Mazakan.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. That's exactly what I was hoping Cryptic would do, is put a spotlight on there, and of course, hopefully that combined with community efforts like our own and some of the links that you put in here, like Starbase UGC, Primetime UGC, Wiki UGC, Broadcast UGC, of course. All of those are also great community resources. And you know, the Foundry Files is working towards releasing on standalone episodes in the future too, so we can try to get more exposure out there, because there's always new content being generated in the Foundry, and if you want to get your hands on new Star Trek mission content, well, the Foundry Files is going to hook you up with more and more missions to take a look at all the time. So
one more thing I'd just like to throw in there is with these, Cryptic will be releasing these every Friday, and I also heard a rumor that at the end of the month they will be posting these on the Star Trek Online, not Star Trek Online, the StarTrek.com website. And I think that would be really great to try to hook in people outside of Star Trek Online, because it's showing great stories that are written by fans.
Fan fiction that can actually play. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's just great.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, guys. Well, I'm sure we'll talk to you soon.
Mm-hmm. See you.
And welcome to our new Talk Trek segment. Mav joins me, and we're going to kick around 3 episodes this week. Balance of Terror, The Defector, and Face of the Enemy. Now, this is our first Talk Trek segment, so it'll be our bumpiest. As we refine this as we go, we'll get a little better at it. But Mav and I were kicking around the idea of chatting about some Romulan episodes that we loved from The Next Generation, and also one from TOS. In fact, in our suggestion list, we even include one from Enterprise. But I focused on the TOS and Next Generation.
All right.
And because, they were doing the reruns, the Romulan reruns just recently, and it seemed like a good time to talk about Romulans and look at some great Romulan moments. The first episode I want to chat about is Balance of Terror. This is sort of one of the first definitive Romulan episodes in Star Trek. Now, Mav, have you seen Balance of Terror? It's an original one, so I know not everyone watches the original series.
No, unfortunately, I did not get a chance to really get caught up on the TOS series. So this one is going to be all on you because I haven't had a chance to preview it myself.
That's great. What's interesting about it is in the first about 5-minute mark into this episode, there is a very tactical analysis of the situation where you have Spock telling the crew over the intership intercom a lot of tactical details about the Romulans. We learned that before this episode, we'd never seen a Romulan, that all of the negotiations had been done over subspace communication, and that's how a treaty was formed. We learned a lot of different things about their tactics. You also get to see like a territory map for the first time of Romulan space where Remus is indicated on the map. So it's not just something they busted out for Nemesis. That Remus was on the map from the very original days. And it also has an interesting tone of racism underneath it, where one of the crew members is a little racist against Vulcans and Romulans. And there's an interesting dialogue around the 14-minute mark where he starts to kind of berate Kirk for some decisions that Kirk is making. And you'd immediately expect Kirk to like spin around and smack him across the mouth and tell him to shut up, right? And just give him a nice what for. But Kirk actually stops and listens and goes, well, that's a good point, and changes his order. And it's like, so he's still, even though somebody's hostile, Kirk's still able to take input from him. I'd like to tell you about a couple interesting facts about this episode.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, first of all, it's actually based off of a World War II movie from the 1950s, from the early 1950s. Called The Enemy Below. So that's what it's got a very sub feeling to it. In fact, so much so that they have a moment where Spock actually makes some sound, and it's a big deal because now they're going to be able to hear them. Of course, they're in space, right? So, sound travel isn't really a big deal in space, but they were playing along with it. It has a very submarine hunt and seek look for it because that Romulan ship is cloaked. This episode was also the first TOS episode that was remastered when they did the remastering. Interesting enough. Going on, there's some interesting music that's in this one that's during the wedding ceremony. We also do see a wedding ceremony in this episode. But what I liked about this episode that really kind of set its Trek canon in stone, this was the first episode where we saw the introduction of the Romulan Star Empire. Okay. Where we actually ever heard those phrases. It's also one of the first times we see a Romulan ship, of course, and they originally were going to be the Klingons, but they changed them to the Romulans at the last moment, which is kind of an interesting backstory to it. And also you'll see a lot of Romulans that wear helmets in this episode. And this is like one of these things that I consider to be like a workaround hack that we have to see a lot in STO sometimes, is they wore helmets because they simply didn't want to have to spend the time to give them prosthetic ears. So, anyways, Balance of Terror is a great episode, but let's move on to one of my favorite TNG episodes of all time. It's also a favorite of the IRC chat room, and it's a great Romulan episode, and that is The Defector from Season 3, Episode 10 of The Next Generation.
Yes.
As James UK put it in the chat room, this episode helped make me a fanatic for this series. TNG Season 3 was extremely fruitful, but this is one of the great ones. And for those of you who don't recall, a defector comes in a very dramatic way, which this originally aired in 1990. This is a very, very nice CG, or wasn't CG, but a very nice space scene where the Romulan ship is escaping from a Romulan bird of prey, and they're firing at it, and it's all happening right in front of the Enterprise, and the Enterprise swoops in and extends its shields around the Romulan cruiser, and it's a very dramatic moment where this defector comes on, and he turns out to be a much bigger deal than he originally lets on. And of course, it's all a ruse. There wasn't actually anything there.
Total plant, I remember.
Yeah. This story, originally, the tease, the part where this episode starts out, where they're doing some Shakespeare stuff, that's written by Ronald Moore, who later went on to do BSG. But the rest of the episode is really written by other members of the TNG staff. It was sort of an ensemble put together. But it does start out on the holodeck, where, Data and Picard are playing around. It's got some powerful scenes. One of my favorite ship flybys in Star Trek of all time, one of them, is at the 8-minute and 47 mark. There's the little Romulan cruiser ship sitting right off the Enterprise, and they pan around it, and they sort of reveal the ship, and there's this great combination of Captain's Log, Stardate 847192, and then also, music and Star Trek ship sounds all kind of come together as they pan around this awesome ship. It's a great moment in that episode. Also, something that I thought was really clever that didn't happen a lot in Star Trek is that around the 20-minute mark, it's actually 22 minutes in, do you remember the scene where Picard calls Data into his ready room, and he says, Data, I want you to keep a record of all of the events that happen, so that way you have an impartial log.
Right, because a lot of the information they weren't sure. They wanted to make sure that they weren't going to be violating any treaties or anything that they had, but they weren't 100% sure because Picard was about to make decisions that could have thrust the Federation directly into a war and in direct violation of the treaties.
Yeah.
So they wanted to make sure that they wanted an impartial record of everything that was going on. No tampered logs, no secret stuff. They wanted to make sure everything was recorded.
And Picard felt that Data would be an excellent record, A, because he could record literally everything, and then B, because he has no emotions, he wouldn't be putting emotional bias on the official record, which is a very clever thing to do with Data. Also, there's an amazing line in this episode that the Romulan admiral speaks, where he says, "One world's butcher is another world's heroes. What you called a massacre, we called campaigns." And it's so true, because we look at, again, this is a Star Trek moment. We talked about this in the Foundry Files. The United States looks at things that happens in other countries, and we pass judgment, and we better yet, we enter countries and say they're campaigns, while people in those countries would say that they're an incursion. It plays on some heavy stuff, and they deal with it very elegantly. Also. Go ahead. One of the great "we gotta get out of here" moments is when they go to the planet to see if there really is this military base.
And there's nothing there.
The Romulans show up, and it's Tomalak, which, by the way, is Tomalak's last mainline appearance. He shows up later in TNG in alternate timelines, but in the main timeline, this is his last appearance, and yet he's a great villain. Tomalak shows up and starts threatening Picard, saying, "We're going to blow you up. We're going to hang your hull on Romulus. We're going to make an example of you," and just start laying it down there. And they have some great back and forth. And when Picard says, "We're ready. We're prepared to die. We'll fight you to the end," Tomalak says, "Is that all you got?" And Picard says, "No, Mr. Worf." And Worf taps a few things on the consoles, and 4 birds of prey decloak surrounding the Romulans. They had brought Klingons along with them because they figured it was a trap. It's a great moment, and it's sort of like this gotcha. You might get us, but we're definitely going to get you moment.
Huge power play moment.
Yeah. And then they all spread, and they all go out, and they go their separate ways. Great Picard moment, great twist moment, a ton of fun.
Yep.
Anyways, the other note I wanted to make is the actor who plays the Romulan defector is a prolific Star Trek actor. He also plays the scientist who experimented on Odo in Deep Space Nine. He's that Bajoran guy. He plays, I got a link to him in the show notes if people want to check him out. He plays a bunch of different roles. His name is James Soylent. I'm not sure exactly on the pronunciation of his name, but you recognize him. He also played Alexander Rosenko, the future from TNG First Boat. He was the all grown up one. He even played a role in Voyager as well. So he starred in TNG, DS9, and Voyager. So there you go. So yeah, that is an awesome Romulan mission. But the last Romulan mission I thought we'd talk about is Face of the Enemy.
The Enemy. Yep.
Now this is probably my least favorite of the set, but it's still a really great mission. It's sort of my favorite Deanna Troi episode. You remember, Matt, this is where she wakes up and the camera opens and it's kind of, it opens with her eyes.
It's all
and
dark, yeah.
It's dark, and then up above, like a doorway or something, there's a big Romulan logo. And she kind of stumbles around and figures out what's happened, and then things start moving really actually pretty fast. The pacing of this episode is pretty good. And I read behind the scenes that the pacing was particularly something they had a lot of trouble with. Like, they felt like they had a great beginning and a great end, but then they got stuck right in the middle and they weren't sure what to do. But in the end, I think it came together. A pretty good mission.
I would agree. I would agree with that because it seemed, you're right. The episode, you started out with mystery, and then the revealing of the mystery. I mean, it was really intense at the beginning. Her trying to remember that she's undercover.
Right.
Deep undercover.
And having to act appropriately as a Tal Shiar officer.
Right, and her coaching from the other spy, and then the end where she completely asserts herself and gets deep into the character before the final reveal.
And she has to take some risks. She has to answer some tough questions from the captain of that Romulan ship. And what's interesting is the dialogue for that captain was written for a male actor they had in mind who didn't work out. They went with a female actress, and they left the dialogue as the same. And it's some great dialogue for that actress. It's really well done. I liked the parts of this episode that were sort of new to Trek. That's what I really enjoyed about this episode, is because throughout this whole episode, you see way more of the interior of a bird of prey than you've ever seen. You learn a lot more about Romulan command structure just by living in that world for one episode, so you get a ton of background stuff. And I read that the set designer wasn't very happy with the way it turned out in the end. He had actually designed a bridge that was going to be in the shape sort of the front of the Romulan bird of prey, so it was going to be multi-level, and the captain would stand at the top at a rail with no chair, always standing, and a wall behind her, because no Romulan captain would trust her other crew members to ever come up behind her, which is kind of an interesting insight, I guess.
It was also one of these episodes that, that got you that kind of inside look into the Tal Shiar. Very limited inside look into the Tal Shiar, but how the regular Romulan military feared the Tal Shiar. They never really knew who exactly was Tal Shiar until they exposed themselves. And usually, once they've revealed that they're Tal Shiar, you normally died, according to how a lot of those people felt. It's like, oh, it's a Tal Shiar. So it's one of those episodes that you get a sneak peek into the secret organization. I guess the equivalent could almost be
like the CIA, maybe?
In thinking Trek terms, you could almost say Section 31.
Yeah, they're Section 31. Yeah.
But they'll do whatever it takes to get the mission done. But they never truly reveal their intentions until, unless they absolutely have to. And even then, they're going to give you all kinds of loops and make you think what they want you to think.
Right. I guess I called it Bird of Prey. I meant Romulan warbird, of course. Here's a little interesting background note. Originally, they were considering Dr. Crusher for the role. They weren't going to have Deanna Troi. But then as they started working through the episode, they're like, Troi's empathic abilities would be very, very helpful. And they do use that as an out. Yep. There's this freighter captain that the ship's talking to, and Troi walks over to her companion spy and says, "That person is lying. I can sense it." And then he blows them up, which was, they wouldn't really have had a way for Crusher to know that without the empathic abilities.
Right.
Let's see, any other things that I'll know? I'll jump through here. The Tal Shiar appears to be very bureaucratic in some senses, I noticed too, which was kind of funny. The most time we ever spent on a Romulan ship, and as noted in the Star Trek Generation Companion, this episode marked the debut of Worf's ponytail, which he would retain the look for the rest of TNG and Deep Space Nine. And the Worf ponytail was heavily lobbied for by Michael, what's his last name? Michael Dorn?
Dorn.
Yeah, Michael Dorn. Jeez, I'm blanking today. I have a blank memory. Where Michael Dorn had lobbied for the change for some time, and he said that the Worf's hair used to remind him of a Klingon that had gone to a beauty salon. Nice. I agree. I like the ponytail Worf too. So
a good one.
A huge contribution to Star Trek canon right there, of course. Anyways, a great set of episodes. Now, next week, we're going to cover episodes that fit in with the 2800 series, and that is Call to Arms.
Okay.
Sacrifice of Angels.
Okay.
And the Hippocratic Oath. All Deep Space Nine episodes. Now, that Hippocratic Oath one is, if you recall, is the one where O'Brien and Bashir get captured, and they have to help some Jem'Hadar break away from the White, or they attempt to help some Jem'Hadar break away from the White, right?
Yes.
And of course, Sacrifice of Angels is the prelude to the whole 2800 series where they get zapped away in the wormhole and Jem'Hadar disappear. And Call to Arms, if everyone remembers, is a great Deep Space Nine battle episode, which also fits in very well with all of this. So I don't want to spoil too much of it, but check them out. We have links to their Memory Alpha posts in the show notes, and we'll be watching them. If you want to watch along, and then join our chat room and give us your thoughts right now, or even leave comments where you watch it, we invite you to do so. All right, Mav. Hey, Mav, congrats on your first radio broadcast last night.
Yeah. Last night, or actually, it was the crack of dawn this morning.
Yeah.
I hit
hence
my
the
first
sleepy Mav.
Hence the sleepy Mav, right? If for those who didn't get it last week, I'll go ahead and this will be my community feedback tie-in here. I premiered for the first time on Trek Radio live. The shows right now are scheduled from 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Saturday mornings. I'm looking to pick up some more time slots. I can work with people to come on, to pick up extra coverage and stuff like that. But right now, that's when it's scheduled. It's called a Jupiter Station. It's my little homage to Jupiter Force and Jupiter Broadcasting. It's primarily a music show. There'll be some tossed in news bits here and there, but I didn't want to take away from what I do with STOked, so that's why I'm playing primary music. However, you can easily join the chat for Trek Radio in-game at trekradio.net, which is the in-game Stow chat channel. You can also, I'm working on setting up a database where people will be able to actually look at my library of music and make requests live that I can put on the air. We also have a TeamSpeak on Trek Radio, which is basically teamspeak.trekradio.net, which you can log into and join me in studio and chit-chat if you want. And if you got something interesting to bring along, especially Foundry authors, we're getting really heavy on the Foundry Files stuff here at STOked. So if you've got a mission or something you'd like to maybe showcase, and you can't get it on STOked, feel free to join me on Trek Radio.
There you go. All right, well, cool. Well, so we'll be back right here next week. We're live at Saturdays at 11 a.m. Pacific at jblive.tv, and join us next week for that. And then we release on Tuesdays, usually very early in the morning Tuesdays, sometimes even late Monday nights, where you can get this show in HD, mobile formats, audio only, streaming, however you like it, along with links to all the things we talked about over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. All right, Mav, well, you go get some rest, okay?
Make sure you send in your emails. I didn't get any really this last week. So if you've got anything that you think that we've missed, didn't cover, again, bugs, exploits, like I said, Foundry Files missions, or just general comments, please feel free to email us at STOked@jupiterbroadcasting.com.
There you have it. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of STOked, and we'll see you right back here next week. When we spin Foundry Files off onto its own show, that's going to be your intro. It's the Foundry Files! The Foundry Files! We did it! Pain! That's better.
He's healed.
Party! Everybody!
We tried to get a screenshot of me trying to get the Live Long and Prosper sign on the wall, but it didn't work because it goes in front of your body, so.
Oh, look at that.
That's cool.